In order to be a better storyteller, we have to master the art of listening. Today, I have 4 clips from 4 storytelling experts, and they are going to break down how they use listening. This first one comes from Renee Rodriguez. Renee is an expert on the neuroscience and the art of influence, and he breaks down a big misconception we have about those who are really listening and where real power comes from.
Real power was the elder in a native tribe that was silent and just listened. But if he wanted to, he could banish you. Doesn't mean he will.
Yeah.
But it was more listening, that the power was in listening and to gathering perspective, still holding court and still making sure that there's order, but didn't need to yell and scream. And a lot of people confuse loudness with power. And it's not the case. And the one that's the most dangerous is usually the quietest. And they have nothing to prove because they've already know themselves. They know what they're capable of. They know what is there, but they also have a bigger picture in mind. So they're not trying to do this. And it's a funny thing that people misunderstand what the alpha energy is. And alpha usually seen as dominant and protective and fighting. It's not what it is. It can, but that's not the purpose. The purpose of an alpha is harmony. It's to keep the peace, and it's to ensure fairness and ensure that there's a community. And at times there may need to be a sense of aggression, but that's the last resort. It's usually diplomatic, and it's usually empowering. And when there is disharmony, the betas get together and they will oust the alpha until somebody comes in and puts order in place. And I think Lion King was a great example of the alpha, and Mufasa, and was a kind and gentle king, but you wouldn't mess with him.
There is power in listening. In fact, those who are the most dangerous are normally the ones who are the quietest, because they're gathering information and getting a new perspective about what's really going on. Now, how do we listen? These next 3 clips are super powerful. This next one comes from Sean Tucker, who is a documentary filmmaker and photographer. And in this episode, he said that there's something that we have to notice and something we have to master.
I struggle with silence like everybody does. I mean, there's something that you learn, like in counseling, there's a very silence is a skill. And the ability to leave it, like if you're sitting and talking to somebody and they kind of run themselves out of steam and they stop and there's a minute of silence, or a second of silence. Most of us will go like, quick, I need to have a question. And because you got to fill the silence, right? We can't just sit there and stare at each other. You're actually encouraged in counseling to leave those long pauses, hold them till they're uncomfortable. Because what often happens is, and if you're familiar with Louis Theroux's stuff, he's a documentary filmmaker from the UK. He's done a lot of stuff in the States. He's a master at this. So he'll go in with just a cameraman to some quirky community somewhere and hang out with them for a week. But when he does interviews with people, they're often walking around a house, showing him things. And he uses this trick all the time, that they'll talk until they're finished saying what they're saying, but it's all been kind of surface. And then they'll finish and they'll look at him expecting him to ask another question, and he'll just look at them. And now there's a camera and this interviewer looking at them, and they feel the pressure to fill that space, and they'll jump in and they'll start talking. And whatever comes out next is usually brilliant, because they have to drop down a level. They've run out of surface stuff. They gave you it all. That's why they're looking for a question to move on to the next topic. But he won't. If he feels like it's good, he waits and they drop down and then start to dig a bit deeper to find something else to say. And it's such an amazing tactic, works in counseling. And I just think, like, it's a bit of a life philosophy, whether it's taking silence or space for ourselves, good stuff always comes out of that. In conversations with other people, in the style of putting things out into the world, like, great stuff comes after silence. And I think like making that space for ourselves more and more, which we're all uncomfortable with. We all hate it. I hate it as much as anybody else. Learning how to be comfortable with our own silence and space with people in our lives as well is really powerful.
We have to notice the urge to fill the silence, and we have to master the art of being uncomfortable. Because what's normally said after that discomfort is usually something brilliant. But this is going to require us to deeply desire something and deeply empathize with something else. Next clip is Janelle Riley. She is with Variety Magazine and has interviewed literally every name in Hollywood that you can think of. She's a master listener. And she said,
It's something that people constantly say to me is like, I love the way you listen. And I'm like, but why wouldn't I be listening? Like, I'm talking to someone fascinating, and people just in general are fascinating, and they're saying something that like, I actually want to hear. That's why I'm here. And so I feel like it was something that I wasn't even like really conscious of. But then I think back to like, we're talking years ago, like maybe in first grade, in Girl Scouts, we did like this experiment where we left a room, and then we came in and we were supposed to tell a story that was meaningful to us. And while we told the story, people were told to react in different ways. So like one person would be like boring, or another person's eyes would kind of start like searching the room, or like, and like it stuck with me, to this day, like how horrible that feels and how much better it feels when someone just like looks at you and nods or is listening,
you have to genuinely be curious about the person in front of you, and also empathize with what it feels like to really be heard. Now, I've been in acting class for about 6, maybe 7 years now, and my acting coach always talks about listening. Now, you may not be an actor, but there's so much that we can learn from the arts. I actually drove to my acting coach's home and asked her if I could film a few minutes of her talking about listening. This is Kelly Young Silva with Words in Motion Acting Studio.
If the actor does not learn how to truly listen, and I'm talking about listening with his whole body, he will not react in a truthful way. So the first thing that the actor needs to do when he goes into a scene with somebody is click in with the person, make eye contact with them, put their listening ears on. As the scene is going, every response that they have, we prepare, right? We prepare with choices, but in the moment, we can't be thinking about choices. We have to get it to show up for us. So if we're not truly in the moment of the environment, listening to the environment, listening to the tones around us, where are we, what is going on, listening to all that inner noise that goes on in somebody's psyche, but at the same time lending to our scene partner, we haven't given anything. And we're in an art. Art requires a keen sense of listening and focus.
I'm curious if there's a difference in your mind with, I'm weird and spiritual.
Me too.
There's listening to you, and then there's listening to the environment and like whatever this moment is trying to tell us. So there's like the third thing, which however you want to add it. Is that separate concentration in your mind in the acting world, or we're listening in both, or are those merged into two worlds?
I think we're always listening in both. Like when you're playing a sport, right? When you have the ball in your hand, you're not just looking at that picture. You have decided, you got to get to first base. The keen sense of, I'm taking in everything. The crowd is roaring around me, the whatever, and yes, I'm taking in all of that moment to create what is going on. So yeah, I think I am convinced this thing that we do, we're lending our spirit to the story. I like to think about the words as, when you read something, there's a tone to something, there's a feeling to something, but then you're taking those words and you're becoming that with your own body, and you're embodying the story, and that takes a lending of the spirit to be able to do that.
If you don't listen, you will not be responding in a truthful way. I love that she said that when you get with someone, you have to make the decision to click in with them and not only be present to what they're saying, but also be aware that there's an environment that you need to be listening to as well. And the only way we can do all of this is to lend our spirit to it. Now, if you have a listening tip, a perspective that was not mentioned here, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment down below. And all these episodes that were mentioned are also linked in the show notes. Wow. Love you guys. Till next time.